Scott Cunningham here with the fourth installment in your training series on running your Arc Pro X and Arc Max series plasma tables. So in this video we're going to be discussing navigating the G-code and fixing errors during a cut. So one of the things, I have positioned my plate currently and I've zeroed out, setting my job zero, and I've also clicked the disable torch button. Because initially while we work on this, we're going to be doing dry runs so the machine is not cutting. Okay. So as we talked about before, this G-code is a series of instructions. And so by moving to different points in the G-code, I can move to different points in the cut. Okay, say for instance I click on that M3, that is indicating a move over here. Okay, so I can actually click on this display and it will take me to that particular line of code that I'm clicking on. So that's very handy. So this is showing a rapid. Okay, this is showing a cut. It's going from this position as it finishes the arc lead-in. This is an arc. It is moving in a straight line from this position to this position. And that's indicated by that single X move. G-codes, it's not rocket science. It's pretty simple to understand, and there's a lot of resources for you to read in. We will be covering some basics on G-code and how to manually input some G-code, but we won't be covering it in depth. Generally, you're going to rely on SheetCam to write the code for you. You could write this code yourself, but it's a lot harder. So I'm simply going to rewind the code, and I'm going to hit run and then resume, and it's going to begin the dry run. Okay, and then I'm going to hit pause. I'm going to let it do the first move and then pause. Okay, I paused on the way up, and that's where you want to do your pauses. You always pause in between your cuts. So say for instance I wanted to skip this code. So I can see in here, okay, my machine jogged over here. It did this cut. It's now going to move over to here to cut this, and then it's going to cut this. Well, let's say I wanted to skip these cuts. I could click on this rapid move and it would pull me to the right spot in the code. Now, what I want to do is whenever I'm skipping around, okay, I want to make sure that I'm starting from the correct spot, which is you always start at the end of your cut. Now, the start of the cut is represented by M3. M3 is torch on. Okay, this is the code that cuts that circle right there. It has the lead in, which is right here, the circle, and then the lead out. And it ends the cut. Okay? So by starting from an M05, I know the machine is going to move to the right Z position and then move correctly to the next cut. That's the best way to do it. So first, to do this, to actually change this, because I paused it, I can't change my cut now. What I can do is I have to hit stop. That pulls it out of the run mode. Okay? So that's my rapid. I clicked on it. I'm going to start from the previous M05, and what I'm going to do is hit run from line. And this is effectively going to make the machine skip these two holes. The Z-axis will move up and then over to its position. So run from line. And it continues on its cut. So I pause it one more time. Let me hit stop. I'm going to go rewind the code back to where we started off from the very beginning. And so now what we're going to talk about is errors on a cut. So essentially, you can fast forward. Before I get into that, let me backtrack for just a second. You can fast forward and rewind the code by picking where you want to go to. Okay, say I want to skip all these codes, all these interior cuts, and I just want to cut the interior. You do have to be right on what you're clicking on in order for it to highlight. So that is the rapid, which moves to the perimeter cut. So I would want to set my line to start on the M05. I click on it and I click run from line. Machine does an adjustment and then it moves back and does the cut. So I'm essentially skipped all the holes. Okay. Again, I'm going to pause it. I'm going to stop it and I'm going to rewind the code. Okay. So I was able to fast forward the code, and let's say, for some reason, a hole didn't cut out the way I wanted to. I can go back and recut a hole. Okay. Usually, now that might happen, say, if you had a problem with your tip, or say your air pressure was off for whatever reason. The machine might sort of cut, but it doesn't quite cut the hole the way you want it. You can go back and recut something. So for instance, with it pulled out of the run mode, I paused it and stopped it. I could go in here and say, well, let's go back and recut this hole right here. So if I click on that hole, I happen to click on the rapid to it, and instead I click, okay, well, let's start from the end of the previous cut, which is the end of this cut. That's that M05. I click on the M05. And what I would do in this situation, if I was actually cutting this, I would turn the torch height control off. The reason being, you're cutting a part that's already been cut. And so the torch height feedback voltage is not going to be correct. So to prevent the torch height control from possibly diving onto the plate or cutting too high, I'm going to turn that torch height control off. So I would go manual, leave the torch height control off. I'd go run from line. Machine moves back, recuts the hole, and then I pause the table. And now I've recut the hole and finished the part. Okay. So by using these techniques in selecting where in the cut you want to go and always restarting from the previous M05, okay, you can jump around in your cut, fast forward, and rewind it. Okay. So let's hit stop, and now I'm going to hit rewind again, go back to the beginning. Okay. So now we're going to talk about errors on a cut. Okay. Let's go back to automatic THC. Okay. And this time I'm going to turn off my disable torch. Okay. And so now what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about a misfire. A misfire is your machine goes down to touch off. It attempts to fire, but it does not fire. Okay. Now this can happen for a lot of different reasons. Everything inside the tip of the torch has to happen in a perfect sequence in order for that arc to fire. If anything is wrong, then you will get a misfire. Misfires can be caused by low air pressure. As your consumables start to wear, you will find that you get misfires. Brand new consumables might go great. Near the end of the plate, you'll start to get some more misfires. Okay, it's totally normal, and it's the most common error you will see. So we're going to talk about that first. And in addition to certain parts, all these parts in your machine, your retaining cap, your shield cap, inside you have a swirl ring, inside you have a nozzle and an electrode. All those parts are consumable, and they eventually need to be replaced. For instance, your swirl ring is a little plastic brown ring with holes in it, most people don't think, a lot of people will think that doesn't wear out because it doesn't look worn out. Well, it does. Okay, and the same with this retaining cap. This will wear out. It will lose the way it conducts electricity. It insulates from the electricity, and it will lose that ability over time. And so that will wear out, and that will affect your cuts. So let's first start off by doing I'm going to simulate a misfire. How I'm going to do that is by turning the actual plasma unit off. Or I could hit disable torch here. Either way is going to have the same effect. Okay? But for this example, I'll actually hit the button on the plasma. So I'm going to rewind the code. I'm going to let it hit run. I'm going to let it cut through these first couple cuts, these first 2 cuts, and in between these cuts, I'm going to turn the plasma off. And what that's going to do is simulate a misfire. So what's going to happen is the machine's going to jog over here. It's going to move down and attempt to fire the torch. But because the torch does not fire, the machine will not move. It will stop. Now this is dependent on the torch height control being on. If I disable the torch height control and put it into a manual mode with it off, it will not wait for the torch to fire, and it will simply move on from its cuts. So now I'm going to run the file, and at this point I'll turn the torch off and simulate that misfire. And you can do the same thing. Okay, so we'll hit run, loads up the torch height control preset volts, and then I'm going to hit resume, and it's going to start the cut. Okay, so I turned the plasma cutter off. Okay, so the machine stopped and waited. Okay, because it's waiting for the arc OK signal. Let me move this here right here. This is a signal that is illustrated right here, and it's a key signal. It comes from your plasma. It tells the machine, okay, the arc is thrown, let's start a cut. Well, because I have the torch height control on, it is waiting for the arc OK. If I had the torch height control off, it would not wait for the arc OK. It would just simply go through the motion and attempt to fire on the next cut. So generally you're going to be running with your torch height control off, or I'm sorry, on. Okay? So the first thing you want to do in this situation is hit stop. Okay? Now, once you've stopped the code, you want to figure out, why did my plasma not fire? Okay? It could be low air pressure. It could be you didn't have your ground connection connected. It could be you don't have the power on your unit on. In that case, lo and behold, the power is not on. Okay? Now, one of the important things is when I turn the torch height control, or I'm sorry, when I hit stop, it not only pulled it out of the run mode, but it stopped the torch from being fired. So Command CNC was attempting to fire the torch, and it was waiting for that torch to fire. If it had gotten that torch to fire, it would have gone through its motion and continued to cut. So it's important that you hit that stop button so you turn off the torch. So, because in this next step, what I'm going to do is turn the plasma back on. Okay? If Command CNC was attempting to fire the torch, when I turn the plasma back on, the plasma would give me an error. It's like turning the torch on with the trigger pulled on the torch. The machine will not allow that to happen. It's a safety feature. Okay? So I would get an error on the front of my plasma. Okay? So When you have a misfire, your first step is to simply hit the stop button. Your second step is to figure out why the plasma not fire. So you want to look at your plasma and see if there is an error code on the front. Go through your plasma cutter's manual and understand what the error codes mean. You will see them, and it's very important that you just don't assume, oh, well, something's not working right. You want to understand why it didn't cut, okay? Because there is a reason. And it could be something like air pressure's low. Well, you're between the machine stopping, your air pressure might go back up, and you try to cut again, and it continues on. But then later down the line, your air pressure drops, and you get the same error, and it repeatedly has the same problem. And so you don't want to just assume that it stopped for no reason. Now, a common error code is a 030 error, and that's called a stuck consumables error. That's probably the most common error you'll see when you have a misfire. And that can simply be something in the tip of the torch didn't quite work exactly the way the plasma wanted it when it fired, and so it gave an error. So it wasn't able to strike the arc. That's a lot of times not an unusual problem, and a lot of times you can just simply do this process, rerun the code, and the machine will fire the second time. Okay? So basically, the machine stopped right there. It attempted to fire the torch, M03, but it did not receive the arc OK, so it did not do the motion. Okay? So we have the machine stopped, and so what we want to do now is I'm going to rewind the code, and we're going to restart this code from the M05, the previous M05. Okay, and the reason for that is I want the machine to go back through the touch-off sequence. Okay, that's ideally, there's two different ways you can do it really. This is the way I prefer to do it. I could just put it on the M03 and hit run from line, and the machine's going to fire the torch and do the cut. If you're concerned about the motion and whether it's in the right spot or not, you can start from the M05 previous to it, and what's going to happen now is the machine's going to move up, back over, back, and do the cut. Okay, so either way works. So I moved from here, I hit run from line, back, back, down. Machine does the cut. Okay? So I pause the machine. I'm going to take the opportunity to repeat this process of a misfire on the next cut. Oh, as a caveat, you can hear the air blowing after the cut. It will blow for a predetermined period of time. Okay? And that is designed to cool the electrode. We can't change that airflow. Okay? So, to simulate a misfire on this next cut, I'm going to again turn the plasma off. I'm going to hit resume. It's going to continue on the cut, attempt the fire. Oh, we got a misfire. Okay? Step one. As you can see, the torch is attempting to be fired. If I try to fix an error on my plasma by cycling the power right now, I will get another error. So first thing I do is hit stop. Next thing I do is figure out why my plasma didn't fire. Are my consumables bad? Is my air low? Do I not have my plasma on? Oh, I don't have my plasma on. Okay. So, now, I can't just hit run from this spot because the machine will just continue on with its motion and it won't fire the torch. It will not get this M3 command. The machine simply reads right here. It doesn't know, oh, I got to fire the torch again. Okay? So, in this instance, instead of going to the M05, I'm going to move back up to this M03. And I'm going to hit run from line here. Oh, well, would you look at that? We got an error during a cut. And it's a perfect transition because that is exactly what I was going to go into. So my machine stopped in the middle of a cut. And that is the next type of error that we're going to be discussing. So first, I encourage you to practice that last error because that's the most common error you will find. So an error on a pierce. Okay. Step one, hit the stop button. Figure out why your plasma cut. Go up to the previous M3 or M5. Click on that line and then go run from line. Okay. So this next error is very similar to the last one. You might be asking, why did my machine stop in the middle of the cut? Well, in this particular case, it stopped because the air pressure went too low. One of my coworkers turned off the compressor, and so we ran out of air. Okay, so as that machine, that compressor charges the system back up. So the first thing I want to do in this situation is hit, same as before, hit the stop button. That turns off the torch, and it pulls it out of run mode. Now I have to go over to my plasma and figure out what was the error that I got. Okay, so for starters, looks like it's an air pressure error. I'm going to cycle the power on the plasma to see if it fixes it. Well, the air pressure's still not high enough right now. Okay, so now it looks like our air pressure's back up. We've cycled the power on the plasma. So how can I fix this error? It stopped in the middle of a cut. I cannot just hit run. The machine will not fire the torch. It will not finish the cut. So what we need to do is rewind the code and recut this line. Okay? So the way you have to do this is I can't go to the M3 because it'll simply fire the torch when it first gets that code. I need to go back to the M05 or M5. If I click on M5 and tell it to run from here, the machine is going to move back up and back over, touch off, refire the cut, and recut this line. Okay? So, what we want to do here, okay, now I could just tell it to run from here, and quite often it will be fine. It'll just recut this line. But because there is already a line cut here, the torch height control voltage will be off from what it should be. It will not be the correct voltage feedback. So the torch will run too close to the material during the section that's already cut. So if I want to prevent that, I can turn the torch height control off. So if I hit manual, torch height control off, now when I hit run from line, because I've set my line back to the previous M05, or M5, I'm sorry, I hit run, the machine is going to move back up, over, refire, and recut that line with the torch height control off. And once the machine gets into a normal material, I can go click on DTHC Auto, and the machine will be back to normal. Okay, so I hit run from line, back up, back over, recut the line, fresh material, torch height control is on. Let me pause the machine. Okay. So we've recut the line and we're back on track. So the part cut out perfectly. There really is no problems with it. So, as you can see, this is basically where our machine lost its cut. Right there. It picked right back up. Didn't cause any problems. So, we fixed that error. So what I'm going to do is resume, and then on the last final cut, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, I am going to turn the plasma off intentionally this time to simulate a loss of cut, a loss of arc on a cut. Okay. Okay. We lost arc during that cut. So, in order to fix this, my first step is going to be to hit the stop button. Pulls it out of run mode, turns the torch height control off. Now I need to figure out, okay, I need to rewind the code. So here's the M0 or M3, the start of the cut, and here's the end of the last cut. I'm going to rewind to the M5 right here. Okay. And in order to stop the torch height control from potentially diving, I'm going to turn it to manual and turn it off. Okay. So now I'm going to hit run from line. The machine's going to move back up and over to the end of the beginning of the cut that I messed up. It's going to recut the line. Once the cut gets to this position, I can turn it back to auto and turn the torch height control on, and it will continue the way it should. So, run from line. Oh, well, I did not, again, I did not turn the plasma back on after I turned it off. So, I'll repeat my steps. I hit stop. And then I'm going to rewind my code to the M5. And this time, I'm going to be sure to turn my plasma on. And now I'm going to hit run from line. Back up, back over. Recuts the line. Back into fresh material. Torch height control is back on. So, that are two examples of an error on a cut. Okay? So it's very important. I recommend you practice those over and over. And you can do them in, say, you can do the misfire in a dry run sequence. Okay? You can't do the loss of arc during a cut in a dry run. But take some time, do some scrap material, practice that sequence of events. It's also written out in your manual if you want it in a written form for you to follow. So if you need to, copy up those pages, print out some cheat sheets, write down some cheat sheets for you, because those steps are very important. If you get them right, you solve your problem, you're back on track. If you don't quite do them right, then you can end up with issues and you can have trouble finishing your cuts. So let's just do a quick recap. So let me adjust this plate a little bit so I can reset up my cut again. And just do a quick recap of this process. So I'm going to zero out my cut for my part. The code's rewound. And what I'm going to do is simulate an error on a pierce. On one of those first cuts. Okay, so we got an error on the pierce. Step 1, hit the stop button. Step 2, figure out why your plasma didn't fire. In this case, turning my plasma on. Now, I'm going to rewind the code to the M3. I'm going to hit run from line. The machine's going to fire and pick back up. Now once it gets to the perimeter cut, I'm going to turn the plasma off again and we're going to simulate an error on a cut. Okay, so run from line. Okay, lost or error during the cut. First step, hit the stop button. Next step, figure out why your plasma lost arc. Third step in this situation is going to be to turn the torch height control to manual and turn the torch height control off. Now I'm going to rewind the code, not to the M3, but to the previous end of the previous cut, M5. Okay, so now I'm going to hit run from line. It will move back over, restart, turn the torch height control back on, and back to auto. And I finish the cut. So that's an error on a pierce and an error on a cut. Practice, practice, practice. Very important. Thank you for watching.